Had never thought that a simple gesture could shatter the established order off me world. It was a sweltering afternoon when time seemed to stand still and every movement felt heavy. I had spent the morning battling dust and clutter trying to get the house in order, but instead of relief, with each passing minute I only felt physical fatigue building up in my muscles like a weight that could not be shed. I wasn't getting any younger, and that realization pressed like a burden and pulling me to the ground. My husband Steve left for work, leaving me alone with my own thoughts. I decided to get some rest, hoping that a brief nap would help me regain my strength, but that's when my nephew Eric knocked on the door. He was a handsome young man in his mid-20s, and I noticed something in his gaze that alerted me. Change was barely perceptible, but I could feel that he looked at me differently than he had before. He walked in and instantly assessed my condition. "You look tired." His voice sounded soft, but there was genuine concern lurking in it. I could barely hold back a smile, realizing that my eyes were half closed from fatigue. Eric seemed to have always been not only a nephew but a man who often heard and felt me better than many others. "Would you like to relax?" Hefford, holding out his hands. Drama erupted inside me. On the one hand, it sounded like a sincere offer of help, but on the other, his voice sounded too tempting and intimate. As soon as he sat down behind me, his hands touched Miss Holder's, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Those touches were too close. I tried to relax, but the tension building as if telling me that our roles were reversing. It wasn't the kind of touch I wanted to receive from my nephew, but something inside me was giving in. With his every move I began to lose mutual control. Eric massaged my shoulders, his hands moved smoothly down my back, and I felt each of his touches pull me to a place I wasn't used to. My body responded to his touch, revitalizing long sharpened senses. I didn't understand how it was happening or what exactly I was feeling. "You're so strong, Aunt Ally," he said, and when his voice shook I felt a strange thrill. The words sounded like a challenge, like he wanted to tell me that I was entitled to more. He leaned closer, his warm breath touching my neck. Andy suddenly realized that this wasn't just a massage anymore. It had become something much more intimate. Seconds turned into tense moments as his hands traveled lower, causing confusion in my chest. I realized I was on edge, experiencing an internal struggle, a system of short-term defense mechanisms against uncontrollable desire. His every touch turned all my fears and doubts inside out, leaving only the naked desire to be here with him in this moment. I didn't know what to do when his hands found the places on my back that could bring me warmth, or conversely stoke a fire that had been stoked for far too long. I wanted to pull away, but my body was reaching for him, refusing to recognize the boundaries between the unacceptable and the ordinary. With that thought came the realization this moment would change our relationship forever. I felt all other thoughts fade away, leaving only the tension that was building and shooting straight to my heart. In the end, something about this moment, this clash of feelings, seemed inevitable. I was ready to open myself up to the new, not knowing where that path would lead. I tried to pull away, but Eric's hands held me tight against the bed, holding me in place. In the tension building between us, I felt myself on the edge of an abyss, dark and mysterious, beautiful, so tantalizing. The feelings coming over me were as unpredictable as a bursting storm. Excitement and fear mixed together. At one point where there was no escape, I lifted my head to see his face. He was looking at me with a dark and intense gaze. Eric was not the obedient nephew I knew him to be. There was something new in his eyes, something that intimidated and mesmerized. At the same time, I could feel the tension between us growing, building like the pressure before a thunderstorm. The incomprehensible desire was so close, so desperate that my mind resisted it, and my body longed to merge with it. He started talking about how I'd served to be happy, about how I had always been strong for others. Those words penetrated me, demanding my attention, as if igniting a spark that had long since faded. I tried to ignore the growing confusion, while his hands continued to explore my back, moving lower and lower, bordering on a touch too close. I froze, and my heart beat in my chest at a frantic pace, generating mixed feelings that gave me goosebumps. Eric barely touched my ear with his breath, sending chills all over my body, and in that moment, I didn't know how to react. I was overwhelmed with both tenderness and fear. At once, the insistent crowd of emotions in my mind merged into a single wave, leaving nothing of my former hardness behind. Pleasure and terror competed for first place in my heart. His touch grew more insistent and overpowering, fighting the need to leave this moment, but curiosity st inside me wanting to know what it was like to be truly alive. I sighed, trying to calm the inner chaos. In that moment, my thoughts were filled with reminders of my past, of how hard it had been to open up to people and trust them. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. The rustle of his fingers on my back made me breathe faster, and all I could do was watch as his hands, confident and warm, moved in a slow but practiced dance across my body. Each touch seemed to deepen the bond between us, and the magic of that closeness made me forget the boundaries I'd built up over the years. An internal struggle was growing. I didn't know how to push him away, and I feared I wouldn't be able to break the burning attraction that was becoming more and more irresistible. I stared at him, trying to read his thoughts, but there was no judgment in his eyes, no intent to harm. On the contrary, there was a fire there that made my blood boil, and at that moment there was more than just A confusing interaction between us. It was a step into the unknown, and every whisper of him was pushing me to give myself to this moment wholeheartedly. And just as suddenly everything came to a standstill, he stopped, his hands pulled away, and the tension in the room seemed to break like a rubber band. Stretched to its limit, I felt the lightness slip from our hearts, as if we were forever between worlds, between previously precise boundaries, and a new dangerous reality. For a moment, I found it hard to breathe. I didn't know if he expected me to understand this wasn't just a massage. This was a moment of intimacy that could be the beginning of something entirely new. I froze in anticipation, not knowing what to do next. Everything was changing, and this night promised to bring changes to my life that I dared not even imagine. Every second lasted an eternity, but in my heart I knew one thing: the transformation had already begun, and I could no longer ignore my desires. Eric was more than just a nephew to me. Something much deeper was binding us together. On this restless evening I had to figure out what I really wanted, and all my inner barriers began to crumble. After Eric stopped, the whole room froze in suspense. I felt time slipping out from under me, and a hurricane of emotions was happening in my mind. The tenderness of his touch, the warmth of his gaze, and the awe had awakened and made me lose touch with common sense. I abruptly realized that this was no longer just a fleeting moment, it had become something much more than I was willing to admit. Abruptly snapping out of that state, I stood up and, gathering me strength, rather insistently walked Eric to the door. That brief moment felt like an eternity as I closed the door behind him, unable to shake off the mounting guilt and misguided hopes, but something inside told me it wasn't over. It all happened an instant. Eric returned a few days later, and this return visit was fraught with new revelations. My husband left the house again, leaving us alone. Feelings of guilt and inhibitions sharpened like a painful memory, but desire and passion flooded the mind. After only 3 weeks our secret interactions became frequent, as routine would meet in secret when Steve left for work, creating our own little suspicious world where it was just us. Very time he came, my heart anticipated the unspoken words and hidden moments we began to open up to each other more, and our connection felt like a magnetic attraction, the epicenter of emotions, anxieties, and desires. Kisses that began in the kitchen, gently showering my neck and shoulders, often happened in the living room, where every shadow witnessed our frenzy. Unexpectedly invigorating, I could feel the pleasure filling our encounters with a thick flame flavor, and in those moments passion became an integral part of everyday life. We kissed in the bathtub, petals of our lips touching each other as if hiding our secret in a veil of water. It was as if these kisses were given to be remembered, and their sweetness left no doubt that something dangerous and beautifully dazzling was brewing between us. But the more it went on, the more I realized that this path was doomed. Each morning as my husband drove away, leaving Eric and me alone, I felt the weight of guilt pressing harder in me. I became a prisoner of my own passion, and a responsibility I couldn't bear. On one such day, as the morning light streamed through the windows, I could no longer hide what was happening. I realized that it wasn't just physical attraction, but a maturing emotional addiction. I knew we couldn't keep going on like this, ruining our lives and those around us. One day I looked into Eric's eyes, and something inside burst. It was time for the truth. With all my strength I decided to share my struggle with my husband. The moment I told Steve about Eric and what had happened over the past 3 weeks, he looked at me with incomprehension and sadness. The feeling of betrayal cut straight to my heart. His full of pain said it all. I knew my actions would hurt, but there was no more strength to remain silent. This candor opened the door to change. Steve walked away for a while, leaving me alone with my own frustration. I stood in the center of my world that had fallen into chaos, feeling both guilt and release from the pressure that was pulling me down. I realized that to complete this phase I needed to be done with myself and all the inconsistencies I had created. But suddenly the betrayal was the beginning of a new understanding. I was able to pen my heart and allow myself to feel. This recognition changed not only me but also my relationship with both men. Despite all the pain, the experience was an amazing lesson for me to choose myself. Now, as the evening lengthened, I looked at the closed doors of my past and realized I was opening new ones. I would no longer allow fear to lock me in chains. This story became more than just a chapter in my life. It elevated me to a new level of understanding, love, passion, and honesty with myself. Learning to love anew, starting with myself, was the true work involved, and it was the beginning of a promising journey.